Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Today, I'm looking forward to learning more about our guest, Madiswan, and you'll know why soon. Madison is the host of the thought-provoking podcast, Bloodstained, where she takes listeners on a journey back to the beginning of slavery, exploring its dark history through the lens of true crime. Madison's podcast meticulously unravels the layers of slavery, presenting it as a complex, but honestly, the haunting truth that continues to impact our world today. She describes Bloodstained as her thesis, which I love, and shares brutal realities of the slave trade and its lingering effects on modern society. You might also recognize Madison from TikTok, where she went viral after a far too familiar, the whole racial incidents that sparked that significant conversation about slavery and its relevance today. So I can't wait to hear what she did with that going viral. But I just want to for a second say I'm here today and I invite all of you listening as well to join me. As I ask, as I learn and figure out my role here when it comes to how the fuck do we not know our history? And maybe all of you can also get curious and encourage your own growth as I am here trying to do the same for myself. So let's unmute and welcome Madison. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Hello. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. How we doing?
We're doing really good. This has been a chill day. I took the day off. I'm just relaxing leisurely. Went on a walk this morning with my sister. Oh. Just edited some stuff and now I'm here. So I'm feeling good today.
Good. Okay, good. Yeah. I got good energy too. I don't know if you know, but today's the day to be manifesting because we got 888.
I saw a TikTok about it and I am manifesting today. I need to remember to write in my journal.
Yes, good. That'll be my call to action for afterwards.
Yes,
I'll join you. Okay, so before we sort of dive into things, I just want to, woman of color to woman of color, take a second here. And just I just want to say, I hope you know, and I'm imagining you do, but if you don't, you're going to know now, you're making a difference, right? What you're doing is making an impact.
It's so funny that you say that. For so long, I've been doing this for 2 years, YouTube wise. Yeah. The podcast is new. The podcast is about a year old. And I was just talking to someone in the DMs about this, but the only way I can function is believing that no one will see what I post, in terms of not feeling so cringe and feeling so weird about myself and throwing yourself out there. I just I'm you know what? It's just me. I'm just talking to myself. And that's the only way I've brainwashed myself to just continue to post. So it feels so good, especially after what we'll talk about. It feels so good to get these comments. It's just kind of jarring because I've been in this mind space of no one watches, no one is paying attention, so I could just do my thing. But getting these comments, getting DMs, I've just really been so touched by how people really took the time to try and understand where I was coming from and really found value in the content that I was producing. I'm floored and I'm excited. Yeah. I mean, it's a new feeling, but I'm trying to roll with it.
I'm glad to hear you say that you're seeing this, and I'm happy that people are reaching out, because I know for me, I was so grateful that my sister-in-law introduced me to your podcast. That's sort of how I got connected to you. And at the same time, which we may get into, I was going through, I just had experienced a really shitty dinner. And so coming across your podcast and getting into some of this, I just thought, okay, women like me, and maybe I can only just start with me, a South Asian woman, I struggle to sometimes protect, speak up, ask for my people, for our people. We are a global majority. And I'm learning now more and more about why that is. So I'm working on fixing that. But what I realize in my life as I've hit 43 that I've really been missing significantly is having women of color around me, because when I see one of you do what you're doing, or like just have the kind of conversation that maybe someone like me would be so scared to, it just superpowers the rest of us, fuels us, and gets us to like get up and speak. And the way you do it, you're so educated, you're so smart. I love how you do it. You do it in a way that connects us on like real time level, not I'm going to speak above you with all these words, because people like me are also smart, but we also sometimes are like, I don't understand this. I don't want to ask. And I just love how you are so real and raw when you talk about the history, the real stuff, where we come from, why we're all pitted against each other, all this stuff. So thank you for that.
Thank you. But also, 43 where? You look like a teenager. Like, what the hell?
I love that out of all of that.
Yeah, I was just like, what? This is impossible. No, thank you for that, honestly. And I feel you. I mean, this has been a long time journey in terms of me personally. Like, I just posted a TikTok video yesterday where I was talking about how I went to an all-girls private school in the LA, Southern California area, with a lot of wealthy white girls. And I was on financial aid. A lot of the Black kids we were a very small, bit of the population. And just my day-to-day life was a lot of me, code switching and just kind of trying to like, figure out my place in that kind of environment. And with some great teachers, with some great friends, I was on my journey, but I was surrounded by whiteness. So I was naturally conditioned to just kind of shrink myself or not speak up. Or if someone said something that made me feel a way, I just would let it slide, because then it gets turned on you for being like the one who's ruining the fun, the one who's ruining the moment. And when everyone has like that kind of mindset, and mind you, these girls are old money, wealthy, like don't need to be aware, will not be aware, like just this is their lifestyle and this is what it is. You internalize that kind of dynamic. And so it can be hard to be thrown into these positions where now you have to speak up, or you feel like you have to speak up. But over my life, like towards the end of high school, Trayvon Martin died for me. And then, into college, like Michael Brown died and Sandra Bland, and all these things were happening. The Flint water crisis was happening. And so my consciousness was being raised in terms of Blackness in America, what that actually looks like, what that actually feels like in a real way. And so this is all happening when I'm, getting my sociology degree, and I'm just kind of like, okay, you need to like shake some of that, because you need to just be able to stand in your truth, stand in your reality, and defend your right to exist and be respected. And I think that those things, like a lot of people in my age demographic, like those are radicalizing moments. And then obviously the election and all of these things that kind of just changed a lot of people's perspective. And it's like, it can be hard when you grow up in a specific environment to unlearn how to socialize with people. But at a point, it's like, you have to look at yourself and say, you're going to keep being put in positions where people are going to either accidentally or purposely make you uncomfortable for whatever they want going on, unless people speak up more. I mean, you just have to call a spade a spade. It's really hard though. So I feel you.
But I also I love what you said. And I just think you and I were destined to meet together. And I swear I'm not a stalker, I promise. But I'm just a Gemini. But so it's crime of passion. But you just spoke like exactly what I always talk about. I call it my white girl complex. So but I wanted to be white. I wanted to do that. So I also didn't I didn't understand where that was coming from, but I also didn't get a chance to ask myself that, because sometimes when you are left with that discomfort, whether someone purposefully or accidentally did it, there was more of those accidentals. And I think that's where you shut up more. The purposeful ones that are like, you brown this, and you're like, okay, come here, let's talk, right? No. Those ones we all wish would find us on the street so we can fight. But it's those other ones and the subtles and the micros and all that we live in, that we're like, oh, my white friend is right. And then, I come to this other place where you try to be in a racialized space. But what I love that you talk about in your podcast, and I'm like, seriously, like, are you watching in on my life and talking about this? Because you say it so well in there that then our own race, we're pitted against each other, because you got the immigrants, you got the ones coming in through slavery, you got the ones that are born here, and all these things in between. And, we can't even come together as a collective. And so what you're doing is such a good example of what would happen if we came together as a collective. You know what I mean? And so thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you for recognizing that. I mean, I just wanted to touch on what you said, because it is those accidental moments that make you as a person of color second guess things. I was just talking about this on my TikTok as well, where I was just explaining, like, we have to, those moments are the moments that are like the most important to speak up, because people will then go on and continue to like say those things. And you feel this intense pressure, because it's like, okay, but if it's a mistake, like I can let that slide, or like whatever. And you just don't want to rock the boat because of just power dynamics and relationships and stuff like that. But it's those microaggressions that allow for bigger stuff to happen. Those belief systems are based in very real, very scary, very racist mindsets that continue to allow like the subjugation of people that look like us, the subjugation of people of color. And so as harmless as it may seem, and as they want you to believe it was, it's hurtful. It's a violent thing. And so that's kind of, I feel like, where we are when it comes to talking about race more publicly and getting to like a more united understanding, where you have to understand the duality, where it's like, if you're a white person who was born in a white supremacist society and raised in that, you have racist tendencies, and we need to get past that level of like having that basic conversation to open the door to allow us to like help people unlearn and like educate and all of that kind of stuff. But it also takes two to tango. And if you're not willing to admit that, or if you're willing to weaponize that, because now racist is like a slur to white people.
Yeah.
They've been able to successfully maneuver being held accountable for their very violent things that they say. And so now then again, you're put in this position of like, why are you taking it that far? Why are you saying that? Why are you ruining the fun? But
why are you attacking us?
Why are you attacking me? And it's like, the truth is, I already know you're racist. So like, why are you trying to act like we're pretending like the sky isn't blue?
Right.
Like, we can just say that, and we know that. So let's move past that and actually talk about like how you grew up, your parents' mindsets, and how that's connected to this big system of, white supremacy, and like not in like this like shame way, because it's like, yeah, you didn't pick your parents, you didn't pick where you were born, but it's like your status quo or what you were raised to believe is hurting people. Yeah. So how do we get to a compromise about that? And a lot of people hide behind like, well, you're attacking me or you're calling me racist. I've never been that. And it's just like so annoying, because the conversation just gets derailed and it turns into like, oh, this person is attacking me. And it's like, no, you're racist. It's cool. But let's move past that,
Yes. Oh my gosh. You say it so well, because I think even that night, even my husband's white. And so he and I, we have 2 kids that are going to grow up in the biracial world. So they have to figure out this stuff. And so my husband and I talk about this, but lately I've been noticing in the last couple of years, and maybe even more so in the last 6 months, like we're having more real ones, because he also has had to do the hard work continually of having to accept that, yeah, he does have racist tendencies. And it's not, well, so do you and you don't or what. It's all I can do is myself start with, I know I'm brown, but I also am working through my dismantling of my internal racism. So like, don't worry, man. I don't get off the hook either. I'm working on having to live with the guilt of
like, we were all raised in the same society.
Well, that's just it.
And even if you were, it's like, no matter what, the same ideals are being upheld. You know what I mean? It's just that I think for brown people and Black people and Indigenous people, like, we don't get the same privileges. So I think sooner we're kind of like, oh, this isn't even real life.
Yeah.
But we still have internalized biases, internalized racism, internalized things that have just been injected into us because of where we grew up and how we grew up and what country we grew up in. So again, by any means, this isn't just like a white people only problem. It's just, it becomes that because they refuse to then say, okay, let's jump over this first hurdle together and let's continue the race. They just kind of stop you. And that's like why it turns into like, okay, white people, like, you really need to fucking get it together. Like, seriously. And because we're all doing the work, we're forced to, you know, us brown people are constantly balancing how we were raised and how people treat us and how that translates to this, like, constantly in our head. And like, it gets difficult and more frustrating with the access to more and more information when white people on the other end won't even meet you a quarter of the way, let alone halfway, to be able to like get past certain things. So it's an ongoing thing, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Really is.
But the difference I'm finding is that it will continue. You know, my dad said this to me the other day with the riots that were happening in the UK, and my husband are about to go to the UK. And so we were kind of making game plans and planning. And my dad and I talked about this, like, even in the Indian culture and the South Asian culture, Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs, all of us, you know, have our own history. And again, we're pitted against each other. And so this whole incident that happened in the UK was because some tragedy happened with these young white kids that were killed during some kind of Taylor Swift dance thing. And the media decides and says it was a Muslim kid. So then now, you know, everyone out in Europe, UK, everyone's, you know, rioting. The whole conversation with my dad, you know, my dad's like, we're not going to see this change in our lifetime. And I'm like, no, but like, one thing we can all do is ask us, like, who told us what they told? I'm a Sikh Punjabi. So who told us Punjabis what they told us about the Muslims? And who told the Hindus what they, you know, what? So like, we also have to go back to, because I said to my dad, I said, do you see right now, like, the racists are not going to the shops and saying who's Muslim, they see all of us Asians as one. So exactly. Imagine if we all came together. What would happen? Like,
so I love that you pointed that out, because that is like, people don't understand, like, every Indigenous group, every person of color is within their own diaspora, and no two things are alike. You know what I mean? And like, the same shit that happens within the African diaspora is the same shit that happens with the South Asian diaspora or the Asian diaspora in general. And all of that kind of stuff. There is a ranking, and who decided who was on top? It wasn't us, it was them. And so at the end of the day, it's like, maybe things won't there's utopias don't exist. Like, some people are just going to hang on to their beliefs forever and just like be like, this is what I believe till I die. White people are the best, da 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 da. Of course. But at the end of the day, it's about moving the needle as far as you can move it. And so the next generation can pick up and move it again. And so what I love about this generation of people with access to information, with social media, we're able to share information so much more freely and openly. I don't know how long that's going to last, child, but yeah. And so it's one of those things. It's beautiful to be able to take the opportunity we do have now to share and educate and talk and discuss openly, so people can see and people can understand, and maybe take a little string and start pulling their own, you know, biases out and start unlearning their own stuff. It just takes one thing that you Google to spark like the whole process. And like, it's a journey. It doesn't mean you read one book and now that's it. Like, it's just a constant life thing. Like, things will trigger you, things will make you think negatively, things like, your own mind is your own mind, and you're going to constantly be brought to a place where you're in conflict with what you were socialized to believe. But it's like, we all just need to do the work.
Yeah.
And it's okay. You know, it's fine. But
Yeah.
as long as you're at some point in the journey, at least recognizing it's important, because that's how solidarity is built, you know, amongst groups, amongst people in diaspora, or even people outside of the diaspora, is just genuinely open heart, wanting to learn and listen.
So how did your heart, like who raised you? Let's learn about you, because how did your heart get so open and willing to listen? Let's start at the start of your story. Like who is Madison? Who is little Madison? Yeah, who am I?
Well, okay. So it's interesting. I talk to my dad about this a lot. Hi, my name is Madison. I am 28 years old, born and raised in California, Southern California specifically. I grew up with my mom and my dad. My dad's a photographer. My mom's a nurse. My older sister, and I grew up in this like very small, quiet suburb off of like LA, very nature filled, very chill. Grew up religious, but like not necessarily practicing right now. But I was talking to my dad about just how they raised us, and like, was it intentional or was it just like their vibe? And like, they ended up raising us in this way where we were like in like straddling two identities always at like whatever thing we were introduced to. So like, yes, I went to church, which is common for Black people to be Christian, but my parents were like, okay, like I grew up Seventh-day Adventist, which is a specific sect of Christianity. You go to church on Saturday, you are really strict to the Bible, you eat a specific way, all of these things, right? But at the same time, my parents were like, okay, but you can go to church, but we're going to tell you, okay, gay people are people. We love this. We love that. We don't agree with that. So yes, I was attending church, but my parents were like saying like, you know, at the same time, this is where our moral compass is. We don't judge people like this. We don't do people like this. So I was always like in church, though a lot of these kids were like, their parents were like, no, fuck gay people, da 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 da. My parents were like, okay, no, like you can have other friends that aren't Seventh-day Adventists. You need to have experiences. You're going to do this. And so I was like religious, but also had one foot in the world at the same time. And like, that was the same with even my schooling. Like I went to a private school, but for only high school. So I was in public school until 8th grade. So I had one foot here, one foot there. So I kind of was able to create my own unique identity with like, okay, like I'm not really thirsty to be in the popular clique here because I have friends that I can go and see who are cool or like whatever. And so in a lot of my identities, there's always this crossroad where I have to like exist in multiple spaces at one time. And like maybe these spaces might conflict with each other in some ways, but I'm making it work and I'm making it make sense. And so I really think that's what underscores how I was raised. Honestly, just existing in the duality all the time of like, okay, yes, I'm religious or I'm being raised religious, but I believe this. Yes, I'm in private school now, but I also understand this. And so I just think that naturally gave me a viewpoint on the world that was kind of in this observing way. And not, I was always like looking at things in this very, you know, critical way because of these conflicting identities that I was straddling. And so I think that's just what shaped a lot of that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the private high school, have a solid group of girlfriends from there, went to college in California as well. I went to the University of California, Santa Cruz, which is up in Northern California. And that was an experience. I loved it. Santa Cruz is like very liberal, hippie vibe, beach town vibes, like lots of white people with dreadlocks walking barefoot outside in the rain kind of vibe. But there I learned a lot and I met my now boyfriend. We've been together for like 6 years at this point. And now I moved back home and, you know, I created the YouTube channel as a COVID thing. A lot had happened in my years from college, those 4 years. Like my parents got divorced my second year, and then my cousin passed away unexpectedly my senior year. And so I was going home to a place that I no longer really recognized. So I like immediately got into therapy, was working this job that I didn't really care about or love that much. And then COVID happened and I was forced to kind of like sit down and like create routines and figure out like, okay, like what do you actually want to do? Because you don't want to do this. So what do you want to do? And so from there, I decided to start a YouTube channel. It was just originally going to be a true crime YouTube channel, but I was specifically only talking about people of color only. I was not going to like do the classic stories that everyone knows, the Lacey Petersons, the John Benet Ramsey stories. They've been talked about enough. I was going to talk about like more obscure things just because our stories never get told in that way. And so from there, I kind of was like, okay, I had like different ideas of what a true crime story would be. So I do an individual, like person to person thing, but then I do a historical thing where I was talking about how the Vietnam War and Agent Orange is a true crime story, or like how the birth control trials in Puerto Rico was a true crime story, or like the Tuskegee experiment. All of these things that are like historical moments that center people of color that, were historical moments because they were being targeted and purposely either maimed or killed or tortured for the purpose of the war, the state, experimentation, science. And I felt like those were true crime stories because it was premeditated and you're clearly trying to hurt this group of people on purpose because you don't value their life, which I think a murderer or a serial killer would also agree with. And so from there, like I was sprinkling those stories in and I really was liking those stories more, leaning towards stories that were less individualistic because I could kind of use my sociology degree a lot more when I was talking about those things. And so I took a break my second year for like 8 months and I just came back with the Bloodstained podcast. And that was just me like distilling what I liked out of my original YouTube channel into a more streamlined thing that I really have been excited about. And it's been great. We're 6 months, 7 months in, and we're feeling good about it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love it. Thank you for sharing a lot about your family's values. Like I loved hearing everything. The place that I really resonated with was, it sounds to me like your parents did such a phenomenal job raising you and your sister in a lot of the ands and less of the ors. Mm-hmm. And so we grow up and, it's this or that. If you believe in this God, then you don't do that. And just like you were saying.
Exactly.
And your parents did such a lovely job to say, we can be spiritual and this is like so important to us. It's our values. But then if these are our real values, and that means in the real world, we have to accept and love. And I think that's what people often, that leave their organization of, religion or wherever that they follow. I think that's often what people will say is like, you realize this is actually not matching my values. So kudos to your mom and dad for doing what they did.
I thank them every day. Yeah. I don't even think they realize. They just kind of were like, oh yeah, we did kind of do that. But it's like, I love how you put it. It's not this or that. It's this and that. Because I think people get too caught up in us versus them, this versus that, black versus white, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, no, there's a lot of gray area. Like this is all mostly a spectrum, to be honest. And so if we're able to hold multiple truths, multiple realities in our hand at one time, and then contend with the fact that they can all exist at the same time, where do we go from there? And it's much more exciting that way.
Totally.
I must say it's just way more exciting.
I agree. Your podcast, for example, like history was never my forte. I didn't care for it in school. I struggled with understanding a lot of it. They don't make it easy for you to want to know it anyway. And again, it's a joke what they teach you. So I just like learning through the way that you teach really does make me want to come back. And I even read you had someone in particular posted on Instagram like a thank you to you, and it was a white woman, and I was like, oh, look at this woman, like I appreciate her saying thanks for teaching me in the way that you did. I'm so clear and I understand. And so I just think, okay, that's the, you're using your niche, you're using your creativity to do something that honors your ancestors. And so you're going to have a lot of ancestral energy coming your way.
I'm feeling it. Feeling it.
Yeah, you should. You deserve it.
That's the thing, though. I feel like the internet has created this space to like dunk on people like intellectually, like, oh, I'm ratioing you on Twitter, or like, you thought that was right, like I'm talking down to you because how could you believe that, or like publicly shaming somebody, kind of like my situation, but that backfired, and that's kind of like the vibe online. And it's like, I think people with the knowledge or who did the work also have to understand, like, communication is also 50% how you say it too. You can't just get on here and just be like, you didn't know that? You're stupid. You're dumb. And then expect people to want to lean in and learn more about what you're talking about. You're creating people who are just disgusted by the elitism and the, just looking down on the fact that they didn't know something or publicly shaming them. And I think that's what a lot of people are experiencing now, where it's like, we have to understand that it's also how you communicate it. So making it something that people can relate to something in their everyday life, or making it in a way where it's like, we're learning together. Like, I'm not above you telling you this. I'm telling you this just to make sure you understand this. Like, I'm not all knowing. I just, have these interests that line up in a very specific way. And I'm just turning on my camera and talking about what I feel. But it's like, I think people forget that, like, you also need to meet people where they're at and not be so like, oh, how could you never know that? It's just like so off-putting.
Yeah.
It's so off-putting.
An interracial relationship could never work if that is the way that we would continue to be. Just speaking from my experience, if my husband and I continue to, how do you not know this? Because I'm naturally going to be 7 steps ahead of him, and he has to figure out how to buy the right training shoes and train to catch up. But I also can, slow my pace a bit too, because it's like knowing our big picture. And at the end of the day, it's like, what is the big picture? Like, for me, is it to shit on him all day and say you suck? Or is it let's learn and grow together? Because we also created some dynamics together in our relationship. And this is just a micro example of like the big picture of what you're doing when you get on and talk on your podcast. So I'm going to pause us for a second, because we're going to talk more about the catalyst of Bloodstained in a second, but let's just do our MFU. So I'd love to ask you, what do you want to put your middle fingers up to today?
Oh, child. I have a couple that I was thinking about. I'm like, which one am I choosing to allow to jump up for me? I think I'm going to put my middle finger up to shitty influencer apologies for racism.
Oh, okay. Please elaborate.
I'm putting my middle finger up to that, just because with my personal situation, why a lot of people like were brought to my content or whatever. And there have been just several instances online in the past week where people have been caught up doing something racist, or in their past said something racist, and in an attempt to save face, they come straight out with some apology. And it's like, you're apologizing because you're getting the heat right now, rightfully so, for what you said that hurt and offended a group of people. But instead of being able to temper that need to be defensive and come out immediately and kind of say, okay, let me listen to what people are saying. Let me kind of take my defense mode outside of it and just absorb the knowledge that people are giving out for free for me to like understand. And then maybe come back in a week with an actual apology where I'm like, okay, I fucked up here. I realized this. I'm doing this. I did this wrong. I did this wrong. Instead of this kind of frantic, like, I'm sorry, okay? And
or
it's
I'm
like,
sorry
no.
You got upset.
Right. And it's like, see, but they don't understand that then confirms for people that you're only apologizing to save face and not apologizing because you hurt people. And, people don't put as much value as they used to in a genuine apology. A lot of real, humble, genuine apologies would get accepted no matter what, if they were done and constructed in a real productive way. But a lot of times you can smell the phony from them. So it's like, yeah, like I'm not going to then absolve you because this apology was like, oh, I'm sorry you got offended. I got offended because you were racist. It's not like you need to be upfront. You need to let people know that you're holding yourself accountable for people to then lean in and say, okay, maybe you're holding yourself accountable. Just because you apologize in like this frantic way for this thing, does it then mean, okay, everything, no one can bring this up from now on. I apologize. I did my part.
Yeah.
And that's usually how it's weaponized. So my middle finger's up to just shitty apologies. My middle finger's up to just stuff like that. Like influencers doing racist stuff and like being able to get away with it. It's just super annoying.
It is. And if anything, it, I think, turns the volume up with what you're doing, what, you know, I'm trying to do. And there's folks like that out there that are like, okay, then let's just take that energy and put it towards teaching, learning, growing, because it's disheartening. And it's also just, you know, you think of parenting 101, we were all children. And, you know, how were we taught to apologize? And I think that's always interesting question. We all have a different story about, some of us weren't, some of us never got them. Some of us got them too much. Some of them, you know, like there's all these stories about how, what, and apologies are deal makers and breakers. And it is the how it comes out. And I 100% am with you on that. I'll add a middle finger to that one too, because I think like, don't, you know, I tell my kids, don't say it. Don't say it. Like, you know, and the other thing is only say it if you mean it. Like, then own you're racist. Like, then don't apologize. Like, you've already done the damage.
Wear that. And that's the thing. They don't want to wear that. And that's the thing where it's just like, okay, but if you don't actually feel sorry, then you don't have to apologize. You're just apologizing to save the brand deal or to save the thing, which in turn makes it disingenuous, which makes me annoyed. Like it just pisses me off more. It's so pointless. But that's so true.
Yeah. Well said. I have one today. I've been saving this one, and you're the perfect guest. So, okay. So I'm going to talk about a little. So I've been talking snippets about this dinner because it was like, it taught me how much I've grown in this learning curve of like doing my own internal racism stuff. And again, not to get reactive and emotional when these things are coming at you. I felt really good about how I handled it. But I've been picking apart parts of the story that have resonated with me. And today's is the whole pet versus threat. So what does that mean? Pet, you know, often people of color, I'm sure you'll tag on, you'll help. Definition of pet is when people of color are seen, you know, we're seen as non-threatening, we're compliant, we're subservient, the good ones, you know.
Right. Not like the others.
That's right. The special ones, Kieran, you're different because you blah, 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 blah. And then at the same time, we could also be the threats, where the ones that are perceived as challenging the status, questioning the history, asking why after these things are said. So there's these things that I'm noticing. So we're on our way to dinner. And first of all, my friend is telling me about how she attended an Indian wedding and bought all the Indian outfits and, you know, the jewelry and, you know, using my you know, a lenga and, you know, saying tikka, but, you know, not saying it right. And I think I kind of got annoyed at this part because you're white, you're going to our event. So it's that fetishization of like all the sexy parts of the South Asian culture. I get to wear these outfits. So like this is the surface part you're talking about, which is I connect with you because I did this custom with you.
Right.
And I think the part that pissed me off was like, you know, she's like, oh, I got 2 outfits and I'm going to buy like one or 2 more. And I'm like, man, I can't even afford one to go to my own party. And you got more, you know? So I'm already a little annoyed, but you know, I think cool. Good for you. Awesome. Like, great. You had a good time. Right.
Right.
But then we get to dinner, and now at dinner, as we get talking, after talking about all the beautiful outfits in my culture, when this incident and this comment is made about, and really what happened was the comment was, what is racism? I don't believe in it. Who even started it? Kieran, you can't tell me that white people were the only ones that started slavery. People of color also enslaved, you know. So I remember it word for word. You know what I mean? I may not remember what I had for lunch that day, but I remember that.
Oh my God.
So that was a setup, right? So this is the beginning of this whole racial gaslighting night. But so in this, you know, I'm like, all right, let's do this. Let's go there. So we start going there. We have this conversation. But the whole pet and threat piece was like, on the way there, I'm your friend. I'm a token. I'm, you know, it's like the Pokemon cards. I'm shiny. I'm exciting. You get to tell me about my own culture. Right. And then now I am not so much of a shiny Pokemon card. You're going to trade me. You want to discard me and get a new one because now I've questioned you in the moment at dinner about like, what's the intent of this? Like, why are we having this?
What do you actually mean by this? Yeah.
Like, why are we having this conversation? So I got met with, why are you attacking me? Right. So it was if you wanted to write a book, I could give you this textbook example because it was just happening before me. But then at the same time in this conversation, when my friend started to get even more upset and defensive because I was being nasty, apparently, I only said, go read a fucking book like 4 times. Okay. But when this was happening, then she had to tell me, well, my best friend is brown. And, you know, like, this is that public service announcement of like, we don't like it when you pull our own people into your conversation. Like, I don't want to be your brown friend in that moment. If you're my white friend and you're telling people of color, I'm your friend, don't bring me up because I'm going to be on that other side with them. Like, I'm
right. And she checked all those boxes where it's like, I am holding my tongue so hard right now. And then you're going to accuse me of attacking you when I really could, because I really want to, because that's the thing that annoys me, because it's like, okay, it's one thing. I feel like people don't understand that people of color understand subtext. You know, you may be saying something and you may be thinking it's coming from this genuine place, but it's how you're saying that thing that's triggering something else. If you are genuinely curious or asking these questions in good faith, you know, you wouldn't say things like, well, I don't understand this racism concept. Who even started this? It's like, if we're going to have a conversation, like a real conversation, we can talk about race. We can talk about these white supremacist hierarchies that exist and that I live within every single day. But I know you don't want to talk about that. You want to think you're talking about it, but as soon as you start to get a little uncomfortable with, okay, if I say this, now you're realizing that maybe what I said was problematic, or maybe I'm not as woke as I thought I was, or maybe me having a brown friend isn't enough. I actually have to do some kind of work to learn, you know, how to not offend that brown friend that I have magically had. It's interesting. I just wish white people were less weird about that. It happens too much. It happens too much in this day and age where we have access to information, that it's like, at this point, you just actively are not trying to learn. Yeah. That's all I can deduce from like how you're having this conversation with me, because you're gaslighting me in saying like, what race mace? Like, what are you even bringing this up for? And it's like, are you kidding me? Yeah. Like, do you see the world we're living in? Like, don't sit here and tell me that you don't buy into this stuff, because you were literally buying into it when you were trying to white-splain my culture to me in the car. I was just being nice.
That's right.
But, you know, that's right. Like you're already having that colonizer, arrogant mentality where it's like, yeah, it reminds me of like when, you know, something happens and then like Black people are like, oh, well, that was racist, or like that was racially charged or whatever. And then white people are like, oh, you're always trying to bring race into everything. And it's like, you brought race into everything. Like, I don't know what, like, how am I bringing race into everything when I'm bringing up the race that you brought into everything? Like, exactly. It's just annoying. And so now you're pictured as, oh, you're the angry brown girl that's attacking me. Yeah. I'm just trying to have a conversation. Why can't I just say my opinion? And it's like, because it's racist, girl. I don't know what you want me to say.
Yeah. And you know, like I have to say, because you're so right, like these things happen. And I think sometimes, because I'm trying to figure out like where does this struggle with their privilege? And, you know, like I know I'm born in Canada, so I have some privilege too. Like I'm not sitting here saying I don't. The key is to try to recognize and work on my blinders. And when someone points it out, it'll sting because I'm working so hard at not being that way. But at the same time, I'm like, aren't we all taught when someone looks out for you, has your back, you have those kind of conversations?
Okay,
right?
Exactly.
So go for it. Go. I love this.
She wanted you to be the pet. in that moment. She wanted you to just be like the docile, like you can say whatever you want. And just because you're sitting next to me, you agree with me. So I'm right.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, there's so many power dynamics at play. And because of the work that you were doing, you were like, you know what? I'm going to say something. I'm going to push back on what you're saying, and we're going to actually have a conversation about it. And of course, you find out in that conversation that it's like, oh, I don't know if I can really deal with this kind of racial gaslighting from someone I thought was a friend.
No,
like,
totally.
This is really changing my opinion of you.
And you know, and where I will commend them is that they haven't called and they haven't, you know, apologized or anything. And I do appreciate that part, because it's exactly what you said about apologies, and that, you know, I don't want to hear it if it's not true. And I think the other thing is, like, sometimes breaking up with friends is hard, and we don't give it enough credit or time and space, because we're recognizing in that dinner, like I am, and maybe they are too, but I'm realizing our values aren't aligned. So if you're going to call me tomorrow to apologize, that's a pretty quick value update. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm glad you're not calling me to apologize, but it is interesting that you called my husband to apologize. You know, so that's where I was like, okay, so you do feel bad, you do want to apologize, but it's interesting that you're picking him, someone who was not at all the one you were having this conversation with, right? So I just sometimes, and really what you're reiterating and what I'm learning from your podcast too is, like, we don't know it all, but when we start to recognize it, there's so much room for empathy and invitation and understanding. And any of us that are people of color and have white friends and vice versa, like, when we get down to actually have these conversations, recognize that it's going to be tough. We're going to maybe bump against it, but can we find a way to carry it through? Because otherwise we're just like, what's the point of losing this whole friendship now? We could have had this fight and maybe got something out of it and, you know, move forward. But now it's like, no, thank you. I'm not thirsty for friendship either. So
well, and it's also like, I feel like you have a family of your own. And it's one of those things where it's like, do I want to have my kids see me in a relationship with someone who is so openly treating me this way, you know, even if it's just a little bit of the conversation of, you know, the wedding and buying all of these things and mispronouncing stuff and all of that stuff and explaining your culture to you. It's like, kids are sponges, you know what I mean? And they look to you, look to the adults in their life to see, okay, it's normal for people to address me like this. It's normal for people to talk down to me like this. And like, I'm going to just think that that's normal. And the truth is, it's like you were standing on a principle. You were standing on a moral situation where I cannot stomach having this in my sphere unless you're actually going to come back and say, you know what, I really fucked up. I put my foot in my mouth. I read this book and I really, really, really want to talk to you and apologize genuinely. But that doesn't always happen because it's the ego thing. It's like, it's the internalized stuff where it's like, how dare this brown girl talk down to me and tell me what I don't know? It's an arrogant thing that I think their community is injected with as a way to kind of cause interference to having these real conversations. Because like, I like what you said about being a brown girl or a person of color with a white friend. There is a lot of space for empathy because I like you, girl. Like I connect on something. I want to be your friend. That's why we are friends. But when these conversations come up, I am not looking at you like some random white man off the street wearing a MAGA hat. I'm looking at you as my friend. And I really want you to understand this as my friend. And so it's just, you may feel attacked, but I'm genuinely trying to have this conversation with you as a friend. And when people respond in such a defensive way, that's how you know where their heart is.
Absolutely.
Where it's like actually being super empathetic and chill right now, because I could really turn the fuck up on you right now, but I'm not.
Well, yeah, I got tone policed at one point because I you know, I was leaning in a little because I was like, okay,
they love to do that.
You know, 100%, right? You're scoffing, you're laughing, and I'm like, I'm laughing because I can't believe I'm sitting here having this, like, what happened? We came out to have a good night. The waitress is like, you guys gonna go hit up the tiki lounge downstairs like you said when you walked in? And we're all like
no, I'm never speaking to this girl again.
Check, please.
Seriously. I love that you said that because it's so true. It's like, any kind of pushback from a person of color is automatically characterized as an attack, when it's like, there's levels to this. I'm talking to you and actually genuinely wanting to have this conversation because I love you and I want you to understand where I'm coming from, because I want you to continue to be in my life. But the more you dig this hole for yourself, the more I realize I don't want you in my life. And that's sad. That's a sad thing too. Yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna make an observation. I noticed you said something, and I'm like, you've been called an attacker too, because I telling some friends, and I might have even said in a recording that, like, because I asked this friend, like, because she had to leave, she couldn't handle the conversation. She had to leave. She came back. And so I said, hey, like, why did you call me an attacker? Because, like, this word comes up so much in a lot of our literature. And personally, to me, an attacker is exactly what you said. An attacker is that pedophile behind the bushes waiting to take me when I'm going for a jog and dragging me in the woods. So when you, as my friend who I love, like you said, call me that, it's language is so symbolic. And so when we use certain words, it's very, very interesting. Like that, it's not you're offending me or what, but this is what you're assuming. All of the trust and credit of our friendship is out the window, because your first question to me is, why are you laughing? Why are you attacking us? So, like you said, then after that, I'm like, okay, now I'm going to have fun and it'll be game on, because you don't get to talk to me that way. And I also not have fun, I got to enjoy this too a little. So
it can't be a one-sided thing. And that's such a good point too, because people really diminish the importance of language and the words that we use and the words that we instinctively use in certain dynamic. There's a reason why she said attack. There is a reason why. There is a sociological, historic, linguistic reason why she said attack. And it evokes a certain thing for us to hear that on the receiving end, but for them to feel that and say that, because we've all been socialized to think that when people of color push back, have opinions, are loud, are saying or defending their position, that is an attack, because it is an attack on their existence, because their existence is based on a certain ideology that we are inferior. So us attacking, quote unquote, or pushing back to that is an attack on everything, on society, everything. It's a protest within itself, because it's so easy to just be like, oh, I'm just going to let that slide. I still like to hang out with her. I just want to get drinks. I just want to have a good night. We're going to go to the tiki bar. I'm just not going to say anything. We're going to let that pass. Even though then on your way home, you'll be privately stewing about, like, how could she say something like that? But it's important that, like, people understand the attack word is a specific word that is wielded unequally from white people to people of color in this very specific way, to frame us in this very specific way. And that's just really, to me, their last ditch effort to still be right when they're wrong. It's like, oh, your tone, you're attacking me. How could you? And it's like, no, it's not about tone now, because you've offended me about 15 times and I've held my tongue. And so this point, and you don't even realize that, and you don't even want to realize that, because it goes back to what I was saying. You can't even accept that you're racist. So, you can't accept that. So now it's, I'm attacking you. I'm this, I'm that. And it's like, you're wrong. You're just wrong.
So,
you are super wrong.
Experiences like this, people like this are, I think sometimes fuelers or of like sparking something within us to maybe an opportunity, right? Crisis is an opportunity. And if we just like switch gears for a second and look at your catalyst, behind your podcast, can we talk about what inspired you to start? I know you talked a little bit in your intro, but what inspired you to start Bloodstained, and how did TikTok, that interaction with user 123325 influence your journey to get the podcast going?
Like I was saying, and like just to continue from what I was saying before, like I had already kind of been dabbling in this history, true crime thing, but I hadn't come up with the perfect formula yet. I was doing these one-off videos and I liked them, but I was like, there's certain creators. There's this one historian creator who I love, who's also a sex worker. Her YouTube channel is Intellectual Media. And she does this thing where she has one-off videos on her YouTube channel of just different pop culture things relating it to history. And then she has these long, like series, like episodic things, not anthology style, but episodic. So every episode you're picking up where you left off in the last episode and continuing with this thing. It's like a long video essay that's like a year-long process of talking about it. And I had seen that she did both, and I was like, okay, maybe that's the thing that I need to do. And so in that 2-year mark, just full transparency, my first year on YouTube was very successful. I'm a nobody. Like, I am
you and me both.
Yeah. I'm somebody, like, there's people that are really always, like, even in day-to-day life, trying to, like, get more followers, do this, do that. And that's not my energy. I just kind of, like, I had my 500 followers, which was high school, college friends, a family, and I was just kind of living my life. But I had to step out of myself to start growing stuff. And so my first year, I kind of ended the year around like 7,000 subscribers, which was crazy for me.
100%.
It's like, I didn't think anyone was going to listen to this or talk or watch. And it's like, the views were low, but it's like these people were, you know, fucking with the vision, which was cool. And so I was like, okay. Then my second year was a big piece of humble pie because I hadn't realized that I wasn't checking in with myself. And I was really like, I had all these plans and I was just going to hit the ground running, but I was completely burnt out. And I had to really reevaluate my relationship with making content, my relationship with what I wanted to do with this. And is this really something that I wanted to do? So I decided, you know, I'm going to take an undefined amount of time off. I just need to get right within myself to see, like, okay, regrouping. And so in that regrouping, I was like, okay, what videos did well? What videos did I like making the most? And I was also dealing with internally certain ethical conflicts. When you make true crime content, there's a lot of people that have opinions about it because it's so violent.
Yeah.
A lot of people feel like, you know, this isn't right for people to create media on people's worst moments, families' worst moments. And, you know, victims' families are still alive. This is a constant conversation that continues to happen in the true crime space to this day. I still consume true crime content, but I felt kind of weird making it now because I was kind of like, okay, I'm not reaching out to people's families. I'm making money off of these videos. Like, where does that put me in this conversation? And realistically, and how does that make me feel? And so I was like, okay, well, the loophole is we can do the history route and focus on historical things, historical moments. And from there, I was like, okay, that combined with, you know, being inspired by intellectual media's formatting, I was like, okay, I think I can work with something here. And it took, I literally just had I posted like a video on YouTube and I was like, you know what, you guys, this is my last video. I'm going to be gone, but I will come back, but I'm just not here with it anymore. And so I took that time off. Ended up being about it like maybe 8 months or 9 months. And in that time, the first part, I was like kind of figuring out what I wanted to do and then kind of formatting how I wanted it to look and how I wanted it to be. And so I spent all of that summer just in the library by my house, writing scripts, researching what episodes I wanted to talk about, all of this stuff, just really diving in fully. And then, I log into TikTok and user 1, 2, 3, whatever, 3, 5, that person made a comment on one of my videos. And I was like, you know what? I'm missing the contemporary aspect to this. Like I was in the library checking out books and theory and all sorts of stuff, looking through my old readings from college, doing all this stuff. And it's like, sure, that can be fit in. But if you want more people to like come to the table, to lean in and want to understand, you got to relate it you got to kind of bring it down a little bit and we can get to those conversations, but we have to start somewhere. And so when user 12335 or whatever commented that thing, I was like, you know what? I'm going to put these experiences in my work. I'm going to talk about what comments I face on TikTok. I'm going to talk about my love for reality TV. I'm going to talk about pop culture moments that we all understand within this so that people understand that all of this relates to how we live our life now. especially in America, slavery is foundational in many aspects of our life. It's foundational in how you view Black people. It's foundational on why the Black person's condition is the way it is. It's foundational on why there's so many Black people in prison. It's foundational to the economy of the entire Western world, and we need to talk about it as such. So, making sure that the most amount of people can lean in and be ready for the conversation was the goal. So I got that comment, and I'm always like finishing touches kind of person. So like I had written a script for that first episode, but then I ended up combining two scripts and then adding that comment on the front end because I just felt passionate that it all needed to work together in one episode. And then from there, I kind of have been, I have my framework of my script that I wrote like a year ago, but then I'm like, okay, what pop culture moment am I going to talk about? What this, what that? And like kind of pulling from those things on a more contemporary kind of basis and why I want, more people to understand what I'm talking about. Yeah. And so that's kind of how it started as a concept. And then, during the process of that 8 months when I was working on it, I was like, okay, like, this could be something because it's like, season 1 is about slavery, but season 2 can be about anything. It could be about the scramble for Africa. It could be about genocide. It could be about a bunch of stuff. There's so much to talk about that to me is a true crime story in the way we just live our lives. We can talk about capitalism and how that has a body count. We can talk about a bunch of stuff, but the reframing is the important thing. And so I was like, personally for me, I picked slavery for season 1 because I was one of those Black people that was like, I don't like watching slave movies. Mm-hmm. I don't like, I know general stuff. And when I was in college, I of course took African American studies classes as much as I could, that aligned with my major and everything, because I just wanted to know, but it's depressing, it's emotional, it's frustrating, there's a range of emotions. It's empowering as well. And so I kind of had been in this place where I was like, you need to start like digging deeper into like your history, your existence, your reality, and get more comfortable traversing that history because it is something that you're avoiding. So I decided, okay, we're going to do my love letter to my legacy, my love letter to my heritage. We're starting with slavery. And then from there, who knows? But it's like, the history is so emotional, I think is the best. There's moments that are high highs and then there's low lows, And so that's kind of why I chose slavery for the first thing. But yeah, I mean, that's really the breakdown, honestly. That's really the breakdown.
You describe like a lot, I'm going to take your words in sort of what you just talked about right now, but you talk about this on the podcast, like you're essentially confronting the numbness of the history. So yes, that really resonated with me. And then automatically I was like, okay, anytime my body's numb, I have to find a way to like find the sensation in me again. So like, how are you finding the way to help the sensation get back so that people can get rid of that numbness? Or is that not even yours to do? Like, can, people listening need to know, well, how do they get rid of this numbness? Like, what do they need to do here?
Well, I think the main thing is question everything. Okay. That's what I learned. Like, it's so crazy because if you're a person who like went to college and you pursued something like a social science, like, philosophy, psychology, sociology, anthropology, something like that, you face a lot of people kind of looking at you like, why would you do that? You're going to college to study that. Like, you're never going to make money. You're never going to do this. And like, that's what a lot of people's mindset is about. I chose to follow my passion. And that's why I ended up where I ended up. But the reality is these are the most important lessons. These are some of the most important fields of study because they are really making the world go round, to be honest. Like a lot of important thoughts, a lot of important things come out of these social sciences. So I feel like, when it comes to learning and understanding, my sociology degree completely changed the way I saw the world. I was kind of creeping into that territory. I had some really good history teachers. There's one in particular, shouts out Mr. Grice. She really opened up my world in terms of history in high school. But it was taking it to the next level when I was, in my first Sociology 101 class that really cracked my skull open and set me spiraling on a journey. And what you realize is that almost nothing in this society is coincidental. It's all constructed by some person for some purpose. Even things that you don't think are constructed for a reason. And so when it comes to unlearning the numbness, part of that process is understanding that very real fact. Like, you're numb on purpose. There's a reason why you're numb. There's a reason why certain images are put in front of you. There's a reason why you learn about history in this format. There's a reason for that. And that's all to relate to the society that we all exist within and we all have our parts within. And so the numbness aspect can only be combated if you're open enough to say, you know what, I need to be critical of everything around me. I have to ask the questions. I have to investigate on my own, which is really the main thing. A lot of people kind of stop with, oh, I listened to this YouTuber, I listened to this podcast, but it's like, go do the extra work. Go, get that library book, go to that lecturer, go do this thing, go ask a question to, your immigrant friend's parents about their experience, like do something, but that's the only way to combat the numbness, because that's intentional. They want you to be numb. They want you to be quiet. They want you to be docile. They want you to just be like, oh, those people are so dramatic. Life is fine, without understanding the prison that they are within, a prison, And so that's just kind of how I feel about the numbness, because it's intentional. And so do whatever you can to fight against that. Like you were saying, being mindful of when you feel the numbness coming in terms of what you're hearing and what you're, expressing, and kind of trying to get that feeling back. It all has to be, you have to be mindful about it.
You do. Like if for a second I can bring up Palestine,
oh my gosh, yeah.
have so much guilt about, you're clearly a safe person to say this too, but like I've had so much guilt as a brown person after October 7th of just like I don't even want to admit that I'm numb to it but I was, because I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. I didn't talk about it. I went along with the rest of the world in a way of like out of sight, out of mind. And, as how I'm so fortunate because parts of my life are coming together in a way that got me to a place of like, why am I not saying anything? Like, what am I worried about? And if I lose that friend, then like, we're not friends. We can't be friends over loving fucking Taylor Swift. Like, that's not our friendship, you know?
That's not deep.
No, it's not deep. It's not. And I don't even love her. I thought I loved her because I was supposed to, so it's like, it's all that stuff. And so you like, when there's people like you out there and there's lots of women and, even like relatives, as we've been spending time talking about this and, what's our role, which is like, got me now looking at the Olympics and looking at things in the world in a very different light. And I think the reason why I'm having this confession is like, I just think like, if I'm out there being like, I don't know what to do, and I'm a brown person, I have so much understanding, and I hear the empathy in you, and all of us people of color have so much understanding of like, no one knows what to do.
No one.
But like, can we just start with opening our mouth and like acknowledging, and then let's go from there. And if we're not even doing that, then like the problem is we think this is all the past. We don't recognize so much of these genocides. And even when you talked about the Haitian like revolution, I was like, holy fuck, I need a nap because I don't know this. I don't know any of this, but now I do.
But it's intentional. But that's the other thing. Like the reason why I'm glad you admitted that, but it's also one of those things where it's like, that is how you're supposed to be, and that's how they want you to be, is to just not be numb, but also just to not use your voice, because the truth is they're all trying to brainwash you to understand and think that they hold the power and you do not control what's going on. Their power is built upon our backs. You know what I mean? In just the proverbial they, whoever them, whatever. But it's like, that's the reason why they instruct you the way that you are instructed. And I think over the past 10, 11 months, talking about Palestine specifically, I think a lot of people have been confronted with, I really don't know how involved, how intertwined this country is with this. I didn't know, how they were funding and lobbying and funding our politicians. I didn't know any of this. And so a lot of us were asleep at the wheel, because, to be honest, I had really good friends who were organizing around Palestine in college, and that's how I learned about it. But I had my really good history teacher in high school. She was a white lady, but she lived in Beirut for a long time, and she got her master's or PhD in Middle Eastern studies. And so at my high school, they offered a class called Modern Middle East for seniors and juniors to take. And I took it because I was intrigued and I loved her teaching style. And she introduced that conversation to me for the first time. We read a book called The Lemon Tree, which was basically this book that talks about a Palestinian family that was living in a house and the Jewish family that took it over, and then them interacting with each other, which was interesting. And we watched the Anthony Bourdain. He did an episode of, in Palestine and like all of these things. And so she opened my mind a little bit to it. But, even then, like you said, out of sight, out of mind, I don't really, I didn't know any Palestinian people. I knew a lot of Jewish people though, but it was kind of one of those things where it's like, I get it, but like, this isn't even really in the forefront of my life at this point. And so in college, I had people who were organizing. So one of my really good college friends was a leader of SJP, which is Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a group that is in almost all college campuses, at least in the United States. And so that it's only then that those conversations started to happen. And it's those environments that allow those conversations. But it's also the fact that I had to understand to like listen first and then do my private research and then form my opinion about what was going on. I think, unfortunately, people kind of don't realize how intense the propaganda goes. So they don't realize that there's a intentionality behind what you're told, what you're not told, and how you're told it. Like, even as little as like, they'll say Hamas killed so-and-so amount of Israeli people. Okay, but then they'll say Palestinians died by something kind of obscure and vague, not by the hands of Israeli occupation, not by the hands of the Israeli government, not by the weapons that the Americans are selling Israeli people, but they just died. Those things add up in terms of how your opinion about these people are formulated. On top of that, these are brown people. On top of that, there's a lot of Islamophobia, even though being Palestinian is a nationality, there's a lot of different religions, but people associate it with being Muslim for a specific reason, especially post 9/11 world, So there's a lot of things that play in this conversation. And I think that, again, I love the internet because a lot of people's eyes have been opened up to the realities. And as well, we are seeing what's happening on the ground. And I think that's kind of why, in my heart, I feel like this is going to end with a free Palestine or some sort of something in that regard, just because it's like, I feel like Israel lost the people. They lost control of being able to control their own narrative, because you're telling us something, but then I'm seeing this Palestinian man holding parts of his son in a grocery bag. And that these people are attacking you, but it seems like, when the metrics come out and you're dropping more bombs in all of World War II, you're dropping the equivalent of an atomic bomb on this tiny little strip of people full of children, a lot of things start to fall apart in terms of your positionality as being a victim. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And I think that, a lot of people are starting to realize that fact on a human level. It's like, I'm seeing kids slaughtered in ways that I didn't even know because of the internet. And that's the thing that I hope that people are taking with them, especially going into this new election season, because it's like, the power is in our hands. And so if we take control and we, let it be known what our demands are, they need to lean into us because there are public officials. We are paying them.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, it's just interesting that, I've seen so many people's like ideas of that small region of the world completely shift in like under a year, just based off of how interconnected we are on the internet.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, there definitely is an upside to have access to, the world in the way that we can, if we can recognize how to go about that. And, we're again paying attention to our blinders and these unconscious bias. If I'm looking at the same news feed, I'm talking to the same person about the same information, it's probably a good time to start to look at a different news feed as well. And start to, like you said, figure out for myself, okay, what is this? Where do I stand? And, like coming back to Bloodstained, how would you say to our listeners that us talking to Palestine about Palestine today is relevant to your true crime podcast?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's so relevant. It's crazy. I mean, on so many levels. Like, again, I think I've talked about this before, but on baseline level, what the violence that is going on is a true crime story. Like the violence that these children are experiencing for no reason is a true crime story, and that's just baseline. But it's also playing perfectly into my conception about how history is told to us, and how it's purposefully kind of messed with and doctored so that we are okay with certain realities existing that really are anti-human, that are really anti-life, that are really just against the better interest of what I think a lot of people want, which is a peaceful world with clean water, with the ability for people to get along, with the ability for, people to, get to know each other. All of these things, there's a reason why that is. And because that is, the control of how history is told is in the hands of the same people that perpetuate this violence, I feel like that's a huge conflict of interest, And I think that ultimately, wherever you realize that, it's important to kind of pull that thread and understand that there's usually more to the story, man. And like a lot of our opinions are based on a specific viewpoint, so that, you're told these things like, okay, for example, like what I got in trouble with on the internet with, where I was, talking specifically about how Israeli backed lobbies, there's something called soft power, which is a concept you learn in a lot of social sciences. But soft power is the power that allows the ideology of the state to exist, but it's not like the police saying this is illegal. It's all the things around it. Socially, what's acceptable to talk about, socially, how things are positioned. And that informs how important they are in your life. So, this idea that most Americans, most people in Western society learn about what a genocide is solely through the Holocaust, whether it's when you're reading the Diary of Anne Frank when you're in 4th grade, whether it's watching, Kid in the Striped Pajamas, whether, all of these different instances as you grow up. But it's a constant thing when you reach a certain age. You're learning about the horrors of humanity through this one situation happening. But by doing that, you're basically telling people this is the only one. And it's not. It just isn't. And so, because what I was trying to say was, genocide is a thing that happens all the time, which is really horrible. But because we learn about it through a very individualized circumstance, people are unable to recognize the signs, the patterns, and there are patterns that relate to. So people can say, okay, the dehumanizing language is indicative of this, or okay, the Holocaust started when Germany was in financial distress. Then these very racialized, blamey, scapegoating rhetorics are attributed to a minority. Then this happens. Then this happens. Like, that's more powerful to me to know, because then as you're learning that, you can pay attention to the world around you and call it out as it's happening instead of after the fact, which is what so often happens. And so when it comes to, just in general, this conversation about how we learn about things, history in general, there is a vested interest in why we learn about the things we do. the Israeli special interest groups, Israeli Holocaust museums, Israeli lobbies, all of these things have a vested interest in making sure that we learn about genocide specifically only through that one lens, so that when we grow up, it legitimizes why a state like Israel is able to exist. And so you're falling into that paradigm of, okay, you're supposed to be here because this happened to you. And so whatever you do, you're being attacked. And it's like, you're very rarely are you learning the other side of the history, that there were people on that land. Mm-hmm. This was never their land. This was not their land. There were people on this land. And what they've done subsequently is try to erase that reality from existing. I mean, I think if they could, they would completely erase Palestine existing on every map, And
well, I mean, many conversations even now are, ethnic cleansing is so simple of like, we'll just tell them to leave. Like, why are you suffering? Like, why are you staying there and allowing your kid to get killed? Like, why don't you just leave? Right. So you're like,
it's like, well, there's so many reasons, because as soon as I leave, that allows them to act like I never existed, But
and then what if we come to your house and ask you to leave? Exactly. Like, you come to my house tomorrow and ask me to leave, and I'm just going to go pack my bag and say, sweet, let's go.
Right. That doesn't make sense. But it's like the way that they show and tell us these things make it so that naturally the empathy isn't felt for the Palestinian people. And that's so things like this can happen, and people can turn a blind eye and say, well, Hamas uses human shields, or Hamas did this. But it's like, there wouldn't be a Hamas if there wasn't this situation in the first place. And I think that more people need to investigate how we learn about things, or why we think certain things are normal or okay.
Totally. Well, and even when you started your podcast and you talked about it as being your thesis, yes. I just remember you saying, even that, like, what was it that you were like, okay, so this whole podcast, it's important of setting historical context. And then I was like writing my questions out for you, and I thought, okay, like, we should also talk about, why do you have to be setting historical context?
Oh my God, you are asking such good questions. I mean, that is the question. I mean, I think I said it in my last episode of Bloodstained, where I was talking about truth is just truth. You know what I mean? And if you're telling the whole truth, you're just being honest about the situation, at least how you saw it.
Yeah.
And you should be allowed to have other people's truths be told.
Yeah.
There is a reason why all the official history, or history that's thought of as legitimate history, is westernized in effort to drown out the very real, horrifying stories of people of color, of what they had to face in those interactions that are usually minimized from our point of view. The genocide of the Native Americans in North America is reduced down to manifest destiny. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, we're not like that. You don't kill over 56 million people like that. Like, that's just that's not real. And so
even for years here in Canada, I'm one of how many that are taught about Indigenous people's history and talk about explorers versus settlers. So that's how we're taught at school. And this is work I do with my kids. Exactly. Like, I know some people don't like it when I say this, but I do tell my kids school's a joke right now. So you find what you like and you're good at, and you get really good at it. And when you go to social studies class, like, that's one way of someone telling you, come home and let's talk about some of the other ways. But like you said, internet and this younger generation, my 13-year-old is able to say, oh, Mom, I understand the difference between colonizing and exploring. I'm like, you're 13. Yeah. Like, you're ahead of me.
And that's the thing. And that's why I have faith in the future, because it's happening like this now. Like, where I was at 13, I was not there. Mm-mm. I was obsessed with boys. I was obsessed with different things. It's like I had, interests, but I wasn't able to do that. And so the fact that information is so freely spread now is so important to deconstructing the history that is the official story that they're choosing to tell you. It's like, okay, like, even I think in my first episode, I was talking about how that first episode was like a episode I doubled back to make because I was on TikTok and I learned about the existence of the Arab slave trade.
Oh my
I had
gosh,
never
yes.
heard about that.
Yes.
I had never heard about that. That was something that has never been taught to me.
I agree.
And it's like, again, like this idea of thematic learning where it's like, okay, slavery as a theme. Who did slavery? When did slavery start? What's the earliest account of slavery? How is it different than this slavery? Like, sure, Black people weren't the only ones enslaved, but they were the only ones enslaved like that.
Can I tell you something about that? I actually want to I want to tell you. You on your end get to hear Black people weren't the only people enslaved, but I want to make you feel good because on my end, I constantly get told, Black people had it worse. So just so you know, we do look after you over on this end, and maybe you look after us on that. But we have to take one, and that's the pitting against each other right there.
The pitting against the ranking of these things, and it's like. If I had been introduced to the concept of slavery as like, okay, slavery is when someone is forced into a place of servitude under a certain person and they're supposed to do this or this or this, then you can get into the particulars. This era of slavery is like this. This era of slavery is like that. But then you would be able to bring in all the different examples of slavery throughout history under just the big umbrella of slavery and how they differed and how they were similar, much like the genocide conversation. They all follow a similar pattern, but there are particulars about every genocide that make them unique, of course. But comparing them isn't ranking them. Comparing them is saying, okay, they did this, this, and this, as well as, these people did this, and this, but they didn't do that. And then they did this because of their cultural situation or whatever. But I didn't know that slavery was happening, on either coast of Africa at the same time to the tune of millions of people for both slave trades. They estimate anywhere between 10 to 20 million on the Arab side, and on the transatlantic slave trade side, it's about 20-ish million, 20-ish million, around the same. And then, so that brings up other questions. Yeah. Then it's like, hey, I'm always taught that Africa is just this troubled place. They can't get anything correct. It's a mess. It's this. It's wars everywhere. All of this stuff. But then you realize, okay, but you guys were funneling people from here from the 7th century. You know what I mean? And so it's like, okay, so then that makes sense. If there's a slave trade to the tune of millions on one coast since the 7th century, now we can kind of see why this continent has gone through so much. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so it's all of these things that open up different questions, and also having the will to be curious to learn and not being embarrassed that you didn't know. I mean, I openly admitted I never did that. People really think that I'm just super well informed, and I try to be, but there's stuff that I don't even know. Yeah. And it's because of how we learn about history in, the Western world.
Absolutely. And, one thing that I love that you show when you're on your podcast is how you are so humble. Is I love how you're so good at being like, I don't know how to say this word. So this is how you say it, and you don't edit it out. And I really appreciate that, because those are such little tiny ways to connect to anyone that's having a curious learning mind of like, oh my God, the expert doesn't know how to say this. This is even better. This makes me want to learn more now. Like we're in the same boat.
We're all, a lot. Some of us are. There was a moment when you were hearing this for the first time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, you pretend that there wasn't a moment when you weren't ignorant to certain aspects is just being disingenuous. It's like, there's certain things I don't know how to pronounce. I stumble on my words. I do this, I do that. But it's like, first of all, I don't edit it out because I'm lazy. But second of all, I'm a person, these are normal things. I got to my point eventually. You understood what I was saying.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I was like, I 100%, I was like, thank you. Because like, honestly, some of what you talk about on there too is like learning our past, as you're saying, helps us in our present and our future. And like you said, recognizing the patterns. I mean, we're told to do this in our relationships and in our medical health. We have to take poop charts, for the love of, to recognize patterns. If we're tracking that shit, can we not track where and what something and how it started? And again, like connecting it to how it's impacting us today. And what I really like that you said was, because I see what you're doing, you're not rewriting our history, you're calling it as it is, and you're saying, look, like when we go back and we start at the very beginning, then dig even deeper because there's another beginning over there, then keep digging and digging and digging and hit the core, and then you're going to realize the Black community is traumatized, not ruined. And honestly, when you said that, I was like, okay, let's talk about that, because this painful history is helping us in the present to understand, you know, for you to even understand your own community, but also like, what can we do? What can we do then to not be traumatized or to not be ruined, but to, you know, manage our trauma, our generational trauma?
Yeah. Well, and I think when you put it that way, it's less like on the onus of that community. It's like you were traumatized by someone, by something. Like, let's place the blame where it needs to be placed. Like a lot of times when people of all races talk about the Black community, you know, there's a lot of anti-Blackness and a lack of understanding of our unique history and why that informs a lot of how we view the world, and just different actions, good or bad. Like, you know, something as traumatizing as a transatlantic slave trade doesn't just get pushed under the rug. Like, everyone's sense of self is based on this generational trauma. And then on top of that, we have a system that came out of that still perpetuates a lot of those same ideas in 2024. Like, it's just ridiculous for people to act like, you know, Black people are complaining for no reason. But again, it goes back to this idea of or history a specific way. So there's a lot of missing parts to the story. Yeah. So people genuinely think that Black people are complaining for no reason. Yeah. They genuinely think that. And it's like, no, there's several reasons. And so that's why I'm like, okay, let's go back. Let's start here. Let's pull it back. Let's do it slow. Let's do it over the course of a year. So it's like you understand episode by episode the real mountain that, at least in this season, Black people are facing when it comes to who we are, how we fit in, our identity amongst each other in the diaspora, how that affects how we view each other. All of these different things that we're fighting, both internally as a group, but also the external things that are, you know, have a vested interest in making sure that we are downtrodden and feel, you know, empowered in our existence. And I think reframing that especially in this time where a lot of mental health conversations are very open, and it's like, so how do you deal with someone with trauma? We all have trauma. How do you treat yourself when you recognize there's trauma? You try your best to heal. Yes. And it's possible. It's possible to see a new day. Time does heal wounds. And so if we're talking about it in that context, then we can start to like pick apart the things that we need to pick apart in order to get a path together to healing and having a better tomorrow.
But trauma, you know, trauma can only be healed if you have at least one, hopefully more people that believe your story. And when you don't have your story believed, your history is what we're talking about, then we don't get to heal. And it's not that we don't get to. The journey is more complicated, takes longer. And many don't get to heal. And then that's where we see the symptoms of addiction. We see symptoms of violence. We see symptoms of incarceration, all these kinds of things that then we start to say, well, those people, why are they like that? They're just addicts. They're just this. And again, you know, it's like, where does that story start? You know, sure, you can get mad at the Indigenous man, the Black man, the brown man that attacked you. I'm sorry they attacked you. That's not okay. You're a human. You shouldn't have. But then we automatically miss the story of like, how do we get here? And it's so interesting you say we're talking about mental health a lot these days. So even in the concept of mental health and therapists and, you know, we're providing treatment. If you have a person of color coming to you and they have experienced trauma, and we as a therapist or mental health facility don't know how to go back to the beginning of their historical trauma, we are doing such a disservice to our population.
Right. And you're not dealing with the root cause. And that's the thing that kind of bugs me. It's like, sure, people are able to move the needle forward, but it's this lack of education, this lack of exposure to the truth that allows people to vote for Donald Trump and think that that's acceptable. That allows people to openly be bigoted in this type of way to perpetuate these same things. Like, it gets harder and harder to perpetuate these oppressive systems when you actually are in community with Black people, or realize how these systems hurt Black people specifically, you know?
Yeah.
And that's why they don't want to tell you the truth, because the truth would point the fact of the matter is you're not better than anyone. You just were greedier than a lot of people and more violent than a lot of people. And that doesn't make you better than anyone. And you intentionally cultivated an ignorant population to specific important details of your story so that it can continue for generations to come. And it's just, I'm over it, man. I'm just so over it.
I'm with you on that note. I kept you longer than I'd like to, but
I had so much fun.
But honestly, I know, and there's going to have to be outside of this a conversation and a hope in a way, and I'll send you an MF middle fingers up sweater or something to say, come back, because I want to talk to you more about in the future, like the whole individualistic versus collective approach. We kind of talked a bit about it, but a little more. And I want to get more into the Haitian Revolution. And so maybe there's a time where we can get together at some point and do another. I'm sure we're going to get feedback of saying, bring Madison back. So.
I hope. Plus me back. I'll be back.
All right.
No problem. So
maybe as we do like our final thoughts and takeaways, is there anything today that you really wish that I had asked or that you had an opportunity to bring up that we didn't quite cover before we conclude?
You know, I'm glad you talked about the thematic versus individualistic, because I'm just going to slap it on in the end, just in general. So I got into some TikTok drama last month with this creator because I was trying to discuss this idea. Now, I realize that in Western education, you learn things on a timeline. This happened, then this happened. You don't understand that historical moments are happening all together, intertwined at the same time. You learn them as individualized moments, and you glean what you glean from those moments. Oh, Lincoln said this at this time. This and this person said this and this time, but you don't understand globally what's going on at the time and how that may affect what's going on domestically. And I bring it back to understanding the existence of the Arab slave trade, because you understand now the context of the continent of Africa and how it's framed versus what they've gone through for so many centuries before a lot of people even were awoken to the fact that slavery was even an option on the Western hemisphere. And so when I say learning about history thematically versus learning about history linearly, I believe the timeline enforces this Western ideology of individualism, that this happened in a vacuum and this happened in a vacuum, and that's how you learn about things. And that's how they're able to like lie about this, or, you know, make sure you don't hear about this part of this, because you're learning about things as if they do not relate to each other and inform each other, which they do in real life, as we know. You know, in our everyday life, we're understanding that, you know, maybe something your mom said informs how you view this person in this moment, and vice versa. We exist in that space all the time, but people don't apply that same logic to how we learn about our past as human. So when you learn about things thematically, it's the pressure is no longer on necessarily the timeline. It's more so about the themes under that, the patterns, the similarities. And I truly, truly believe that if we did learn about things thematically, there would be a lot more empathy, a lot more global solidarity, and a lot more understanding of different people's circumstances, and less of this like, well, I'm Asian, so this is my issue, and I'm Black, this is my issue. It's like, no, it's all of our issues, because what you find when you learn things thematically is a lot of the same players are at the center of these issues. You know, a lot of the same people are perpetuating these issues in every community that we're all facing. And so putting them next to each other and being able to say, oh, that also happened to our group, that also happened to us, allows you to see the patterns and to be able to say, okay, now I get why this community is this, or why I get why they're paranoid and suspicious of people like this. Like, now I can approach them better in a way that they may be willing to understand me. Like, all of these things relate to how we as human interact with each other. And I think there's a disconnect when it comes to connecting different people's histories. There's also a disconnect on understanding how interconnected we all are, and the fact that we're all kind of facing the same devils that are controlling our lives.
It's so well said. Like when we look again, know our big picture, and on a macro level, you're absolutely right that what is connected is really a big part of how we are here. And if we were going to look at it from an individual place, it's like, then what's my role? What are how is knowing all this on the big level getting in the way or impacting, helping me thrive, all of the things that are good, bad, and ugly for us? So we can deal with it because you're right, when we keep looking at it on a small level, then we get so defensive of like, well, I wasn't born 700,000 years ago. Right. And it's like, well, I wasn't either. So why am I still suffering? Like, what the hell?
Exactly. It's like, hello.
So this is one-sided still. Thank you for clarifying the narrative again, right? So
right, loud and clear. No, seriously.
You say that so well, and just keep talking, keep making that voice get out there for us, because you gotta reach us all. And I'm glad you were able to come over on our end here as a guest and reach our listeners, because I think a lot of us we're trying, we're learning, and folks like you, I think, just add to the collective, which is what the end game is, so.
And as long as you're learning, you're doing your part. As long as you're pushing that needle forward or trying to, you're doing your part. And that's important to recognize yourself for that, because most people don't do that.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I absolutely. And I think it comes with self-compassion. If you care for yourself and have so much compassion for yourself, I think you have the capacity to feel like an idiot when you ask a question of I'm sorry, what about this or what about that, so.
I'm curious. It's important.
I endlessly curious. I love it. So one thing, if there's only one thing our guests were going to leave with today that they could think about or go do, what would you hope that would be?
I would say, again, stay endlessly curious. Stay endlessly curious and act upon that curiosity, and don't be bullied to not do that. Push against the borders, ask the questions, ask why. I feel like a lot of people don't ask why enough about everything. Why is this the way it is? Why is the calendar this way? You will find yourself being directed in different ways that you didn't expect, opening up so many things in terms of your worldview and your understanding. And so that's what I say. Keep asking why, be endlessly curious, and push against those boundaries for sure.
I love that.
Thank you.
Madison, thank you for fulfilling a dream. And,
big my God.
Shout out to you. Shout out to my sister-in-law, Nana, for introducing, me to you. I know. Thanks. Yes. She'll love that. Before you go though, you on your podcast shared a little bit about a side project you're working on. I don't know if you want to tell us about the book or you want us to wait, or I can edit this part out if you're like, don't bring it up.
Well, so this is kind of just future manifesting, and it's 888, so let me manifest it. So I mean, a lot of people have been asking about, maybe even like coming out with a book and talking about this, and even just talking about thematic versus linear stuff. And, I'm manifesting that for myself. I think that'd be super cool if I could do that. My socials are all Madiswan, Instagram, TikTok. You can find me on YouTube, the Madiswan channel, if you want the visuals for my podcast. And Bloodstained is on all DSPs. So you can look for that for sure and find me. I also have a Substack where I am more personal. It's more of a community thing. I do diary entries, month logs of how my month is going and different things like that. And we're building a community there. And through that community, I also want to start a book club, because of all the drama that happened. There's so many people recommending such great books that I was like, it'd be fun if we learn together. So that's my next phase of trying to okay, what would that look like? And, how would we do this over Zoom? How would I coordinate this? What would I want this community to be like? So all of that is in the works. Follow me on my socials, and I'm sure you will hear about it.
I love it. And we'll post your socials up too when your episode comes out.
Awesome.
So I just want to thank you again I want to thank our listeners. These conversations are door openers. So if right? Like if anyone wants to reach out to Madison to continue this conversation, reach out to us. You know where to find us now.
Yes.
But please keep this conversation going. And can I ask you for a huge favor?
Yes.
Can you conclude with your outro, please? What do you always say? I love it so much. So that's the last thing we're gonna hear before I end it.
So we will end this by saying Black Lives Matter and free Palestine until it's backwards. Love you. Yay. Oh my God.